It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. With President Yoon having been in office for almost a week now, we've seen his diplomatic pledges start to turn into policy. Now, Yoon has called for a greater role for South Korea in the world, and he's emphasised this throughout his inauguration speech last week, after which he greeted foreign dignitaries at the ceremony and then attended his first diplomatic event, the US-led COVID-19 summit, online. Now, today we discuss how South Korea under Yoon will broaden its role in the world and address some of the biggest geopolitical issues in the region. For this, we're joined by Se-ryun, Professor of Law at Kyung University in Seoul, and Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, Head of International Relations at King's College London. Very warm welcome to you both, and, well, beginning with you, Professor Song. Now, last week, we saw President Yoon engage with foreign dignitaries and take part in his first online summit event with other government leaders. So what were your takeaways from Yoon's first diplomatic steps as president?
Well, as expected, Yoon administration, as a conservative administration, is expected to align more with the U.S. and be more active in the regional and global issues. That means becoming more positive about forming a trilateral security alliance in the region, along with the U.S. and Japan, maybe even open to joining the Quad if invited. And also making clearer stance on human rights and other controversial issues, especially with China, and be more principled, rule-based in dealing with North Korea and so on and so forth. So I think those are the things that are expected, and the changes that will make happen as opposed to the previous administration. I think that those will be also the issues that Joe Biden and President Yoon will talk about next week.
And Professor Pacheco-Pardo, same question to you, really. Your takeaway on Yoon's first diplomatic steps last week and how they really set the tone for what he's going to do in the short and long run in launching Korea as a pivotal state in the world.
Well, I think South Korea is going to be asked to attend more of these meetings, multilateral meetings, minilateral meetings, and to have a voice. We saw it with the recent COVID-19 discussion that you mentioned. We saw it also with the Summit for Democracy that took place, for example, last December under President Moon. So I would expect the current president, President Yoon, to become an active voice in these forums. And I think that he will present a Korean perspective of global affairs, which of course may be different from the perspective that we may have in Europe, for example, but that will be welcome because I think in terms of values, Korea is quite close to the US, to Europe, to other democracies. So even though the perspective might be different, there's also going to be a degree of alignment with these other democracies, in my view.
Professor Song, Yoon emphasised the value of freedom in his inaugural speech, mentioning it 35 times, and he obviously used it very liberally in order to indicate his approach to both domestic and international issues facing Korea, from overcoming social and economic inequality to protecting liberal democracy abroad. Now, how active and how vocal do you think Yoon is going to be in promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific?
It shows, I think, his fundamental value tilted towards market mechanism, but also shows his philosophy regarding the role of government. Modern politics is about the mix of invisible hand, market mechanism, and the visible hand, the government's role. He has a fundamental problem with the previous administration in how those were apportioned. Same thing with the global affairs. I think he would advocate the rule-based, free trade-based system with a multilateral frameworks of safeguarding security and democratic values. I think he seeks to be in partner with U.S. and other nations in the region to be active players going forward. I think that domestic matters and the foreign affairs kind of come together in his philosophy and his directions and policies.
And Professor Pacheco-Pardo, now with the Moon administration, the focus of Seoul's foreign policy was very much peninsula focused, with former President Moon's priority being inter-Korean peace and diplomacy, alongside denuclearization efforts, of course. But for Moon, it seems that he's focusing more on international values like liberal democracy and human rights, and applying that to North Korea as well. So how do you think Yoon is going to approach engagement with Pyongyang?
Well, we have seen that the first opportunity has arisen with the COVID-19 situation in North Korea, or North Korea at least acknowledging the gravity of the situation domestically. I should say that I was expecting President Yoon to take any opportunity for engagement with North Korea and try to see what happens. And this opportunity has come very early in his presidency. So I'm not surprised that he's advocating for South Korea to offer vaccines and cooperation with North Korea. I do think, though, that North Korea launches an ICBM, for example, or even conducts a nuclear test, because there have been some preparations in recent weeks, that he will take a tough approach. He will be pretty critical towards North Korea. And I do think that he will mention human rights issues, for example, more often than the previous administration. But I think in terms of trying to engage with North Korea, I'm not surprised that he will try to do so, because at the end of the day, if he can improve inter-Korean relations, he would go down in history as one of the presidents helping to improve relations between the two Koreas. And ultimately, that's something that President Yoon would like to achieve, if possible, of course.
And your thoughts on this, Professor Song? How would Yoon Suk-yeol incorporate values like human rights and freedom into his North Korea policy?
I think that it goes back to the basics of human rights are universal values. There shouldn't be any North Korea-specific human rights situation. So this is a principle of Vienna Declaration, a very important principle in human rights. I think the Yoon administration will eschew exceptionalism that the Moon government seemed to have carved out for North Korea and go back to the principle of the rule-based approach when it comes to North Korean human rights and dealings. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he will be antagonistic towards North Korea through and through. I think he will believe free trade and economic growth will pave the way for the political freedom and the better human rights. So he would be open to working with North Korea economically, but that has to be based on the assurance of peace and the abiding by the global principles.
And Professor Chakopade, well, Yoon said that he had an audacious economic plan for North Korea should Pyongyang make a sincere commitment to denuclearizing. What do you think he has in mind exactly?
Well, I do think that he would be willing to offer a comprehensive economic package to help improve the infrastructure of North Korea that, as we know, is very underdeveloped by the standards of the region of Northeast Asia. I think he would be willing to offer food aid, other type of support, for example, medical aid to ordinary North Koreans. And I do think that he would be willing to ask for exemptions to the sanctions regime currently imposed on North Korea to try to improve the economic well-being of ordinary North Koreans. So I do think that he has, or seems to have, a very comprehensive package. Of course, this is predicated on North Korea changing its behavior dramatically. But I do think that he sees the benefits not only for North Korea, but also for South Korean companies and the South Korean economy of better economic relations between the two Koreas.
And Professor Chakopade, it does seem that the Yoon administration is trying to look beyond the Korean Peninsula, and this is very much in tune with the title of your book, really, being released very, very soon. But, well, with South Korea aiming to play a more sizable role in the world, in what ways do you hope to see the Yoon administration really expanding Seoul's role and engaging in world diplomacy?
I think there are three main issues here. First of all, working with allies and partners. And of course, there are partners in Northeast Asia, right? The US, Japan trilateral, together with South Korea. other partners in the Indo-Pacific, Australia, for example, the Quad as a whole, and then, of course, partners beyond the region, for example, in Europe, Canada, another country that is very willing to cooperate with South Korea. The second point, I think we would expect an increase in aid provided by South Korea to developing countries. It is true that South Korea is one of the most recent donors at the global level, but I think there's expectation that it will help in more poorer countries in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, or Latin America, for example. And finally, something that I referred to before, distinctly South Korea. That is going to be based on values, of course, democracy, but that is going to show to the rest of the world where South Korea stands today, which is a developed country, a full democracy, a market economy that has a very interesting view about global affairs that may be different from other countries.
Well, we apologise for the slight technical hiccup there. And Professor Song, what kind of role do you think South Korea could play to promote liberal democracy and human rights in the world, as Yoon said he would?
As the professor mentioned, Korea is a middle power country that has successfully gone through industrialization and democratization, along with the development of soft power culturally. I think our insights gained from that process will be relevant to many countries in the world, especially those that are trying to build foundations and institutions for sustainable society. So as we try to increase our voice, and especially working with allies, especially the U.S. and the Western countries and other countries in the region, probably we'll be able to contribute with the institutions and also insights, so that what we hope for globally, the solving of our urgent problems, and also build a sustainable, peace-based and prosperous future, probably that will be much more easily achieved if Korea resolve and also be more active in the global stage.
Professor Song, this upcoming South Korea-US summit with President Joe Biden expected to visit. So what do you expect to top the agenda for the two leaders when they meet?
Well, I think that because North Korea has recent provocations, that should be very short-term and very urgent discussions. But as we're discussing in this occasion, what kind of role Korea could play in the region and also globally, I think that would be an important agenda going forward. And also, I think that on a personal level, the President Biden and President Yoon should be very familiar with each other going forward in order to make a lot of ideas and visions into reality, because the personal relationship, I think, counts a lot in dealing with those very sensitive and very important issues in the world.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we're going to have to wrap up the interview today. That was Se-ryun, Professor of Law at Kyung University in Seoul, and Ramon Pacheco Pardo, Head of International Relations at King's College London. Thank you both so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.